Samantha kissed me on the cheek, tying her hair into a loose ponytail. "Yoga helps me clear my mind," she said, grabbing her water bottle. Something felt off. She had been saying the same thing every Wednesday for the past 3 months, always leaving at exactly 6:45 p.m. and returning around 9. The first few weeks I hadn't thought much of it. People need routines, right? But then little things started to stand out. Her yoga mat, which remained untouched in the hall closet. The fact that she never came home looking sweaty or relaxed. Wasn't yoga supposed to leave you feeling loose, at peace? Instead, she returned distracted, her phone clutched in her hand, sometimes even wearing perfume. That was the final detail that didn't sit right with me. Who wears perfume to a workout? So I booked a class, under a fake name. Wednesday came, and I left work early, stopping by the yoga studio 15 minutes before the session started. The receptionist barely looked up as I signed in under the alias Daniel Carter. I had no idea what to expect from a yoga class, but my goal wasn't to stretch. I was here for confirmation. The studio was small, cozy, dimly lit with soft ambient music playing in the background. A few people had already rolled out their mats, chatting in hushed tones. I picked a spot in the front row, making sure I was in clear view of the entrance. 6:55 p.m. I checked my phone. No messages from Samantha. 6:59 p.m. The door opened. She walked in, no mat, no workout clothes, just a stunned expression. My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm, stretching my arms overhead like I belonged there. Samantha stood frozen at the entrance, her hands gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She glanced around the room, like a cornered animal looking for an escape route. Then our eyes met. Her face went pale. For a second I could see the calculations running through her mind, the desperate scramble for an excuse. She had walked in expecting a lie to continue as usual. Instead, she had stepped directly into her own trap. "Oh hey," I said, keeping my voice casual, even warm. "Didn't know you came here too." Her lips parted but no sound came out. The instructor, an older woman in leggings and a loose t-shirt, smiled at Samantha. "Welcome. Go ahead and grab a mat from the rack. We're about to start." I watched as Samantha swallowed hard, her fingers twitching at her sides. She hesitated. Then, without another word, she turned around and walked straight out of the studio. She never showed up to yoga again, and that was how I knew. Ethan remained on his mat, feeling the smooth fabric beneath his palms as the yoga instructor began the class. But he wasn't paying attention to the slow, deep breathing exercises or the soft hum of meditative music filling the room. His focus was entirely on the space where Samantha had stood just moments ago. The way she had frozen in the doorway, the flicker of panic in her eyes. It was all the confirmation he needed. She hadn't expected him to be there. She had no plan for this. He stretched his arms forward, lowering into a deep pose, but his mind was elsewhere. If she had truly been attending yoga all this time, she would have simply walked in, grabbed a mat, and taken a seat like everyone else. Instead, she bolted, choosing flight over fight. That reaction alone was as good as a confession. Ethan smirked to himself, exhaling through his nose. She had been so sure of herself, so certain that she had him fooled. Every Wednesday she had kissed him goodbye, pretending she was heading to a yoga class for some peace and clarity. Yet here she was, unable to even step inside the room she had supposedly been coming to for months. As the instructor guided the class through another series of poses, Ethan let his body go through the motions while his thoughts unraveled the mystery in his head. Where had she really been? Who had she been meeting? And more importantly, how long had she thought she could keep up the charade? When the class finally ended, Ethan rolled up his mat and took his time gathering his things. There was no rush. He wanted to give Samantha time to sit with her own panic. Let her wonder if he would come home, furious, demanding answers. Let her squirm. He stepped outside into the cool night air, feeling more amused than angry. He wasn't the type to explode in rage or beg for explanations. No, that wasn't his style. He preferred silence, the kind that made people drown in their own guilt. He wanted Samantha to feel that weight pressing down on her before he ever spoke a word about it. Instead of heading straight home, Ethan took a detour. He stopped by a nearby coffee shop, ordering a black coffee and sitting by the window, watching the city move around him. Samantha had made a fatal mistake. She had assumed he wouldn't dig deeper, that he would take her words at face value. But Ethan was patient, he was methodical, and most importantly, he never played a game he didn't know he could win. After finishing his coffee, he finally made his way back to their apartment. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with deliberate slowness. The living room was dimly lit, a single lamp casting a soft glow. Samantha was already home, sitting on the couch, pretending to scroll through her phone. She glanced up when he entered, her expression carefully composed. But Ethan noticed the stiffness in her shoulders, the way she gripped her phone just a little too tightly. "Hey," she said, her voice too casual, too forced. "How was your day?" Ethan set his keys down on the counter, tilting his head slightly. "Pretty interesting," he said, watching for her reaction. She gave a tight smile, nodding quickly. "It's good." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Samantha cleared her throat. I had to skip yoga today. Work ran late and I just wasn't feeling up to it." Ethan almost laughed. She was still lying, still clinging to the illusion that she had control over the narrative. He let the silence hang a little longer before finally speaking. "Oh, that's funny," he said, his voice smooth, calm. "Because I was there." Her entire body went rigid. "You were at yoga?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, watching her reaction with quiet satisfaction. "Yeah, figured I'd give it a try. Since you always talk about how much you love it, I thought it might be fun." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. "I even got there early, sat in the front row. You know what's weird, though?" He paused, letting the tension build. "I never saw you." The color drained from her face. Ethan pushed off the counter and walked past her, heading toward the bedroom. "Long day, I'm gonna take a shower," he said over his shoulder, acting as if nothing had happened. He didn't need to accuse her outright. He didn't need to shout or demand answers. She knew, and that was enough. Samantha didn't move from the couch for several minutes after Ethan disappeared into the bedroom. She stared blankly at her phone screen, but she wasn't reading anything. Her mind was racing, scrambling for an escape route, a way to undo what had just happened. She had been so careful, or at least she thought she had been. Every detail had been accounted for. She planned her departures down to the minute, made sure to never arouse suspicion, even threw in the occasional complaint about sore muscles just to sell the lie. But none of that mattered now. Ethan had seen the truth with his own eyes. Her hands trembled as she set her phone down. Maybe she could still talk her way out of this. Maybe he hadn't actually been at the studio long enough to see everything. What if she simply pretended she had arrived late, peeked in, and left when she saw there were no available spots? No, he was too smart for that. If he had gone as far as booking a class under a fake name, he wasn't just guessing. He had been planning, watching. The sound of the shower turning on in the bathroom made her pulse quicken. The water would drown out the noise, give her time to think, time to prepare. Slowly, she rose from the couch and walked toward the bedroom, careful not to make a sound. His phone was sitting on the nightstand, exactly where he always left it. Her fingers hovered over it for a second before she clenched her hand into a fist. No, that would be stupid. Ethan wasn't reckless. He wouldn't have left evidence sitting out in the open if he had any. Her eyes flickered toward the slightly ajar closet door. Inside, Ethan's clothes hung in neat rows, his shoes lined up perfectly beneath them. He was a creature of habit, predictable in all the ways she had once found endearing. Now, that meticulous nature terrified her. If he had already begun putting the pieces together, what else did he know? Had he followed her before? Had he checked her messages? A sharp wave of nausea rolled through her. She turned on her heel and walked back into the living room, sitting down and forcing herself to breathe. She needed a plan. There was still a way to control this. If she acted too guilty, he would know for sure. She had to act normal. The shower turned off a minute later. Ethan stepped out of the bedroom, towel drying his hair. His expression was unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes. Samantha forced a smile. "So, are we going to talk about this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. Ethan met her gaze, his lips twitching slightly. Talk about what? A chill ran down her spine. He was playing her own game against her, and for the first time since this started, she realized she was losing. Samantha's fingers curled against the couch cushion, her nails digging into the fabric. Ethan was staring at her, his expression cool, detached, unreadable. The way he stood, relaxed, composed, like he had all the time in the world, made her skin crawl. She forced a laugh, though it came out too sharp, too brittle. "Come on, Ethan, you show up at my yoga class out of nowhere, surprise me, and now you're acting like nothing happened?" Ethan tilted his head slightly, feigning confusion. "I thought you'd be happy to see me there," he said casually. "You're always talking about how much you love yoga, figured I'd give it a try." Samantha's stomach twisted. He was enjoying this, watching her squirm, forcing her to navigate the minefield of her own lies. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I didn't expect you, that's all. And I wasn't feeling great, so I left early. Ethan's lips twitched in amusement, but he didn't challenge her. He just let her sit there, unraveling in the silence. A thick tension settled between them. Samantha's pulse pounded in her ears. She had two choices: keep digging herself deeper or try to flip the situation in her favor. She chose the latter. "Look," she said, exhaling slowly. "I know this seems weird, but honestly, it feels like you don't trust me." Ethan raised an eyebrow, almost impressed. "That so?" "Yes," she pressed, leaning forward slightly. "If you had questions, you could have just asked me instead of sneaking around. I mean, signing up under a fake name. That's not normal, Ethan." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "That's funny," he mused, rubbing his jaw, "because I thought what wasn't normal was claiming to go to yoga every week and then walking in without a mat, without workout clothes, looking like you'd rather be anywhere else." Samantha's throat tightened. He wasn't taking the bait. He wasn't getting defensive or apologizing for not trusting her. He was too controlled, too certain of what he had seen. A cold realization hit her. He had already made up his mind. There was no talking her way out of this. No excuse, no well-crafted lie was going to change what he knew deep down. She swallowed hard. "Ethan, He held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Don't," he said quietly. "I'm not interested in whatever story you're about to come up with." The finality in his voice sent ice through her veins. Ethan turned away, walking toward the kitchen, and Samantha felt a wave of desperation rise in her chest. If he was pulling away, if he had already decided where this was going, she was losing control of the situation. And Samantha Hayes had never handled losing well. Samantha sat frozen on the couch, watching as Ethan poured himself a glass of water in the kitchen. He didn't slam the cabinets, he didn't yell. He simply moved with quiet, deliberate ease, as if the moment was already behind him. That was what terrified her the most. If he had screamed, if he had demanded answers, she could have spun something, played the victim, maybe even turned it back on him. But this version of Ethan, calm, detached, already seeing the situation for what it was, left her no room to manipulate. She swallowed hard. "Ethan, please." He turned to her, glass in hand, and took a slow sip before responding. "Please what? Can we just talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan studied her for a long moment, then let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "Talk?" he repeated, setting the glass down. "Sure, let's talk. Let's talk about how I've been living with a stranger. Let's talk about how I sat back for weeks knowing something was off, waiting for you to tell me the truth. Except you never did." Samantha's breath hitched. "It's not what you think," Ethan scoffed, leaning against the counter. "It's exactly what I think," he corrected. "And you know how I know that? Because when you walked into that studio and saw me, you panicked. You didn't just look surprised, Samantha. You looked caught." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had nothing left to say, nothing that wouldn't sound like another excuse, another desperate grasp at salvaging what was already beyond repair. Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "You know what's funny?" he said, almost to himself. "I didn't even want to catch you. I wanted to be wrong. I would have loved nothing more than for you to laugh, tell me you'd been going all along, and then roll out a damn yoga mat and show me up in class. But you didn't." Tears pricked at the corners of Samantha's eyes. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. Ethan exhaled sharply through his nose, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. "That's the thing, isn't it?" he murmured. "People like you never mean to, but you do it anyway." Silence filled the space between them, heavier than before. Samantha wanted to reach for him, to say something, anything that might undo the damage. But Ethan had already made his decision. She could see it in his posture, the way his shoulders had squared, the way he was looking at her not with anger, but with finality. He pushed off the counter and walked toward the hallway. "You don't have to explain, Samantha," he said over his shoulder. "I figured it out for myself." And just like that, he disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Samantha sitting in the wreckage of her own lies, realizing, too late, that she had lost him for good.